we go. So hi, Nicole.
Hello.
Hi. So thanks for joining me today. I wanted to discuss a little bit for my website, kind of our relationship together. And I'll kind of start out with a little introduction for you, for those of people who don't know, because you have actually been out there quite a bit with the Lora Webb Nichols Encampment Wyoming book. There's lots of press that's going on, and I'll mention a few of those places in just a moment as well. So I'll give a little brief introduction to you and your work. So Nicole Jean Hill and I met many years ago at a portfolio review when she was presenting some of her personal work, and her work can also be found at NicoleJeanHill.com. Currently, she's a professor at Humboldt State University, who was the amazing fiscal sponsor for fundraising of this Lora Webb Nichols book as well. The book has garnered lots of press in the last few months, and Nicole doing interviews on places like the Nearest Truth podcast with Brad Feurenhelm, and also Alex Soth discovered the book somewhere and featured it in his YouTube page. It's also been featured in the New Yorker recently, Daily Telegraph UK, Elle, and there was an exhibition at Blue Sky Gallery in 2021, and it was also shortlisted for the Aural Photo Book Award for the historical book. So Nicole, she learned about the Lora Webb Nichols Archive at an artist in residence in Bush Creek Foundation for the Arts in Wyoming in 2012. She found the work at the Grand Encampment Museum and read about the over 24,000 negative archive, 24,000. After many years of research, the diaries, letters, and digging in the CD-RAM cassettes, she created a curated collection of hundreds, if not thousands, of scanned negatives and prints of Webb, and also Webb's fellow contemporary photographers at the time. She had collected a lot of her fellow artists' work. Today, Nicole and I will talk about the archive of Lora Webb Nichols, her role in the archive, and our relationship in the development and production of the book Encampment Wyoming, Selections from Lora Webb Nichols Archive 1899 to 1948, published by the Dutch publisher FW Books, and the book is available from the Lora Webb Nichols website. Also, there's a link on Nicole Jean Hill's website, and also on my site too. So thanks for joining me, Nicole, and we'll kind of dig into a few questions about the production of the book. So you had approached me, I think it was a couple of years ago. So this was quite a process of actually doing it, starting from your time in 2012 at the foundation, and then going through the archives. And then I think in 2018 or 2019, I think you and I started talking about the book. And do you want to talk a little bit about what you kind of had in mind for concept when you approached me?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Lora Webb Nichols archive spans a long time. I mean, the images in the book are 1899 to 1948, but she photographed all the way up until 1962. As Melanie said, and you're saying it's 24,000 photographs. And so my initial thinking was that the book needed to be like an academic style book with a lot of text, chronological order, explaining the trajectory of Lora's life and career. And that's, kind of overwhelming if you think about trying to put that together of someone's entire life. So I had sort of developed a book proposal that was chronological and went through chapters of Lora's life, and then the photographs that kind of matched the chapters, different essays that kind of went along with it, and put together a book proposal to a handful of academic publishers looking for someone that would pick up the book and be interested in it. And I wasn't really having any luck with that approach. I think because the academic publishers aren't super interested in photo-based books because they're really expensive to produce and they don't make money. I mean, not a lot of books make that much money, period, but especially not ones that are more expensive to produce. And so the academic publishers were, they would always say, thank you, this is a really interesting project, but we're not going to put it into our roster. And so I reached out to you when I had gotten to the point where I was like, this is such a special project and such an amazing body of work, and I don't want to give up on this. But after, so many rejection letters, I was kind of like running out of options.
Yeah. And then I saw it and I thought, this is incredible. This is special, just probably like you did and like everyone else does too. And then we kind of looked at a lot of the imagery, and I said, not to pull in necessarily just her name, but I said, this is like the next Vivian Mayer.
Mm-hmm.
This is something where the whole world is going to catch wind of this, and everyone's going to be incredibly excited about this. And that's what's happened too with all the press that you've actually had because of this wonderful book. So we kind of talked, and I said, well, I know this Dutch publisher, and Hans Gremmen at FW Books, and I'd met Hans a time or two at book fairs, and he's absolutely fantastic and very generous and kind and thoughtful, but an amazing designer. And his books win awards every single year from a variety of prestigious places. But I also happen to know he loved the American West. So we got the proposal together, which was actually quite brief, and mostly it was kind of some of the PDFs that you had put together, because you had actually curated a lot of the images and pulled together a collection. And I think Hans was jumped on it like right away. Yeah, so we heard from him pretty quickly.
Yeah, because when you put together a proposal for the academic presses, they're so long and they're so elaborate, and you have to do like market research and all of these different sections and how you're going to publicize the book and blah blah. So the thing that I think I originally sent you was like 15 pages long with just text, and then not even including the images. And then I sent that to you, and then you made this very concise, I think it was like a page or two thing that was like getting to the things that people really need to know whether or not they want to be involved in the project or not.
Yeah. And then we kind of started the negotiation with Hans. It was very informal, and in his negotiation process, like we never even had a formal contract. It was kind of a series of handshake deals via email, and in all of our discussions. And then Hans put together a budget for the book. And then can you talk a little bit about how, because we had also kind of come up with a little bit of an idea of the budget, but can you talk about a little bit about process of fundraising? Because you wrote a lot of grants, and I can't remember the timeline of it. I don't know if some of them were written before we had a publisher or not, or if we had to do them all afterwards. So if you can talk a little bit about establishing the budget and kind of the process of getting some funds.
Right. So when you were able to connect me with Hans, I didn't have any funding or anything. I just was still looking for the publisher. And then he said, yeah, I want to be on board. And then I think we kind of sketched out a general idea of how much money would need to be raised to make it happen. And you actually provided me with the link for the Furthermore Foundation, that grant that they do for book ideas. And to go back to the idea of the contract, they needed the book contract as part of the application process to apply for money for the printing of the book. And Hans just actually provided this very simple, like 2-sentence email that said something like, yes, we are interested in publishing the book if funding is available. And that was it. And then that was able to serve the function. And the Furthermore grant is given out, I think they give out like for a year, and it's like $15,000. And so I think we had based our budget on that number. I mean, also just knowing what books can sometimes cost. And then I wrote the grant using Humboldt State as the fiscal sponsor. And I don't remember, so that would have been like 2019 at some point, like summer or fall or something. And I heard back from the Furthermore Foundation, and they said, yes, we want to give you money, but we're only going to give you $4,000. And so then it was like, okay, now there's this big gap between how much we are getting, which is still awesome, but how much we need. And then when you use the fiscal sponsor, they take portion of it. So the university takes, or whatever fiscal sponsor one would use, takes about 15% or so. So I also had to kind of make up that. And so I did write a few other small grants then. And I think it was sort of like, we talked to Hans about a timeline for it. So he just said, his recommendation was you can publish it any time of year. It's just, you kind of want to avoid November, he said, because that's like kind of this weird sort of dead zone in terms of book awards and stuff. So we were shooting for sometime in, I think summer or early fall 2020 for the project to happen. So I had between sometime in like mid 2019 to sometime in 2020 to come up with the remainder of the money, $11,000 for the book. And I applied for some small grants here and there, and also some random foundations that support projects, and didn't have any luck. I made a phone call to the people that run the Brush Creek Foundation in Wyoming, where I'd done the artist residency. It never met the people that actually run it, but I got their phone number and I called them up and I asked for money, which was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And they said yes, and they gave me a portion of the funding for the book, and then I still needed more money. And I kept looking around, and then I found the Wyoming Community Foundation grant, which I had assumed earlier that you would have needed to be a Wyoming resident, which I'm not, even though this project is based in Wyoming. But you didn't have to be, you just had to have a fiscal sponsor. So I applied for that grant, and in December of 2019, and then was just kind of keep my fingers crossed. I was short for the book publishing budget based on Hans' estimate by, I think, about $6,000. And so I was like, well, if I don't get that grant, then I'm not exactly sure what I'll do, but I was just keeping my fingers crossed because I wrote a really good grant. And I found out that then in March in 2020, I did get the money. And then I had folded into the grant two different components that I think were helpful. Number one was an exhibition. So I asked for money for printing and framing of an exhibition to accompany the book, which would then bring more, I think, attention to Wyoming history, which that foundation I thought really liked. And the other thing that I did, which I think also made it successful, was I said that a portion of the books would be donated to Wyoming public libraries. And so then I was able to say in my grant writing process, because one of the things they oftentimes ask you for is like, how many people will this affect, and how many different geographic locations will this affect? And I was able to put in like a graph that said like all of these libraries, all of these counties, and then I did like a numerical calculation based on how many people would check out the book over the course of X number of years, whatever. And so I was able to not just say like, it's for this kind of weird kind of like art book kind of thing that the community foundation might not totally understand, the photo book world, but also be able to expand its like impact on the larger community. And then from there, we went from that, and the budget ended up being pretty close to the estimate. I think we kind of tweaked it as we went, and I certainly could have used more money in the sense that maybe more elaborate things with the printing or the size, but actually I think it all worked out really well, that everything kind of came in exactly as it needed to launch this off the ground.
Yeah, it worked out perfectly, and it was very smart on your part for the grant demographics to expand it to a broader community.
Yeah, and I think if I do that again, if I look for more grants for future publications or other programming, like, I mean, that's just a win-win situation. Like, who doesn't want to support public libraries and make things accessible, and then be able to broaden the impact of something like that? So I thought that was that has turned out really well, and I sent them out. I mean, those books are all in every public library in Wyoming, and maybe my demographic impact data that I put together is accurate, maybe.
Yeah, right. Your evaluations for your grant writing, then you can actually say that I did all these things. Yeah, and the fiscal sponsor thing too. I think that usually the range is probably, you know, if you get really lucky, you might get on the 5% scale. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's like about 5 to 15. But I'd say you're at least looking at 10%. So you got to kind of like make room in the budget. And I usually say that with budgets anyway, at least add in an extra 10%, you know, kind of buffer, because you never know what might happen. Like when you and I were discussing things like shipping and proof copies, and you know, there's lots of like kind of unforeseen expenses that might just kind of slip in there that you don't estimate. Warehousing, for instance, you know, if by chance you don't have a distributor or something.
Well, totally. And that's actually one of the things that I didn't foresee. I mean, we didn't know that the book would be so popular and that we would sell so many so quickly. I mean, honestly, that totally took me by surprise. But if I could go back to a few steps back, knowing what I know now, I think that is one of the things that I would have like wanted to dig around more, the idea of warehousing the books. Like, again, we had no idea that it would be as big and as popular and there would be a second printing. But then there is the question, where do the books live? Like, and what country do they live in? And what happens if someone orders one in, you know, Wyoming versus someone ordering one in France? And how does that all sort of play out? But that's, you know, one of those things where it's like, it's a good, not a problem. It hasn't been a problem, but just like a question that I didn't even know was a question. Because normally I think these things happen at a much slower pace than they did in my
You didn't think you would be ordering like hundreds of copies for you personally to ship out.
Right.
You know, you take on the role of like, which I think is like, you know, I guess admirable might be a bigger word to use, but I think that you've taken on the role of curator for this too. And a lot of it that people don't realize that there's not as much compensation for you personally when it comes to some of this too, except for, you know, the gratification and maybe the continuation of the archive and maybe a continuing role for you in this. And like you were mentioning a few minutes ago, that the bookmaking process is usually not a profitable thing. So I think it's great that you're actually doing a lot of this too for the archives, and I look forward to like the other books, because there's some, you know, you and I talked a little bit before this started of some sneak peek of maybe some potential for other future books, so people can be on the lookout for some of that too.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned like if you could go back a little bit too, and I asked you this in one of the other talks that we did, but you know, what do you think? What might be the biggest thing, maybe aside from that you could, if you were to go back and change something, what would you change, or what was your biggest mistake in actually publishing the book?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't frame it as a mistake or anything, but I think it was like, I think that going with FW was perfect, right? Like the book is beautiful. Hans was awesome to work with, no complaints there. But it's like, well, what does that mean when they're all stored in Amsterdam? And then suddenly you've got people in Canada or Wyoming, you know, like they can trickle over to this continent, but it's slow. Like they come over on a boat. So it takes, like, from the moment you say, I'd like some more books, from that moment that you say that to the moment they actually arrive is like 50 to 60 days. And so I think that planning that, and here's one of the things that I'm definitely changing, just because of me, I did decide, I could have made the decision to just not be the bookseller and leave that to other people. But because I have such I think a personal connection to the Lora Webb Nichols Archive and the mission of trying to create a legacy for her moving forward, I feel like I want to be really intimately involved every step of the way, including like who's buying the books and where are they going and why are they selling? Like, what is the source of the sales? I want to know these things. One of the things I'm changing for myself is I'm not doing pre-sales of the books right now until I actually have them in my possession, because it seems like, because of that delay of getting books from Europe and then not totally knowing when they're going to show up, it's like when they've arrived, it's always been this panic on my side of things, like physically putting the books into boxes and moving them, because I'm not an Amazon warehouse, I'm just me. So I think it's not really a mistake, but it's just kind of like modifying my approach a little bit as I go. And then at one point, Hans had mentioned like, oh, you can pay to warehouse them in the US, and then the books would just cost more. I'm trying to keep the book cost as low as possible because I want to make the book as accessible to as many people as I can. But, you know, if I had been able to foresee how things would have played out, maybe that would have been something I would have pursued a little bit more in terms of just storage in the US. And again, I never thought that I would have to think about these things at all.
Yeah, I know. Like, I knew it would be successful, but my thought was about maybe 6 months or so it would sell out. And I think we sold out he sold out in 3-ish or something.
I was less. I think it was less than that because I think, well, my first shipment of books, the book, I think came to me mid-February. The Alex Soth video came out February 20 something. By the time I went on spring break for work, which was like March 20th, I had no more books. So it was like within a month, my possession, they were all gone. And then I was having to do the big long, like, they're on their way on a boat, coming over. And then those books had already also sold out before I even had them. So it was just like kind of just a stressful thing, to have like these pending orders and then not have anything to send people and be getting emails like, where are my books? And yeah.
Well, I wanted to say that you had mentioned the second printing and saying that a little bit about the text in the back, and it was much more legible because the ink saturation was a little bit deeper to you. I know a lot of people want the first edition a lot, or at least the photo book collectors a lot of times want to get the first edition, but then the second printing is out there in the world and for people to get, at least for right now, and who knows if it may go into a third printing sometime soon as well, because the way the publicity is working, and also some of the other secret details that you told me about other potential things that are in the works. So I would suggest if people want one, then you should probably get a copy sometime soon. And then you kept mentioning also that being warehoused in Europe, you can get copies, of course, if you're in Europe, from FW Books. He's got some copies there too. So yeah, so tell everybody about that. So anyway, anything else you'd like to share that you feel like you kind of learned from the experience, or if we were talking to photographers, maybe something that you learned from the experience?
Well, I guess I wasn't really sure how it was going to be working with Hans and his design of the book. And I don't know, I think we also just got really lucky because when I sent him all of the images in a sequence, and it was and a rough copy of the essays that we had, very rough, and it was like, okay, let's see what comes back in like 4 weeks, gave him some time to work on it. And there was a lot of anticipation, like, is this going to be something that I'm like, oh no, like scrap this or something. I was amazed at how close it was to what it then ended up. Like the feedback that you gave him and I gave him, like it was all pretty minor. Like we had, some discussions about the book cloth originally was going to be a little different color. There was originally going to be a little bit more text because I think also Hans probably had, this is just me speculating, but he probably had the same thought that I had to, feeling this desire to be a little extra didactic with the presentation because people would be like, well, who's Lora Webb Nichols? Yeah. And it was like, let's not put any words on the front, let's strip it down. So it actually was just taking what he had done and actually paring it down a little bit further. And so I thought that experience was really good. There were things that I was nervous about communicating with him because I think there's also probably we never Zoomed or anything. We did everything by email. And this is, of course, like in the middle of a global pandemic. So it was extra, there's an extra distance, I feel like, with that in a sense. But I think that there were certain things that I would say, I don't really like this, or I want to change this. And I had to figure out a way to say it that was still very positive and constructive, and you know, because I didn't want, I just wanted to keep the conversation really open and positive. And it was interesting to see like moments where like Hans would be like, yeah, okay, that makes sense, you know, whatever. And then moments where there was like, no, I think we should actually do it this way. And I feel like we had a pretty healthy relationship of like, if there were things that he really wanted to maintain in terms of his design of the book, then we had that discussion and worked it through. And then other things he definitely was like very fluid with, and I like that. And then your feedback as well, you know, with some of the sequencing and some of those things, I think that we meshed really well in that way. And any of my concerns walking into that relationship, it all just worked out, I think, very positively.
Yeah. And I felt like he did the same thing with me too, where I'm just like, no, you should eliminate this, and or move these things around. He was like, and he did the same thing. He was like, okay, that's good. Okay, that's good. No, here's the argument for these.
Right. Yeah.
This sequence of like the images of the men in the bars, you know, like I think that I was like, it feels a little like it's too many. And he kind of countered that. And now in looking back, I agree with him. So, and then there's some that Alec had pointed out in the video. There were some of my favorites too. Like I'm so enamored with, you know, I mean, I have such a history with photo books in the first place, and the way that images dialogue with each other. And the one that Alec pointed out too is one of my favorites, which I'm kind of, you can't see some of my collection, but I do actually like put a bird on it kind of thing, you know, like I've got like a bunch of birds in my collection. Such a girl. But there's the ones with the bird in the window and the man at the typewriter, and then the follow-up with the full page spread of the two girls holding a goose, I think it was. And then there's a few of them there that are just sequenced and some of this came from you, I'm sure, as well, but there's this patterning where it communicates in a certain way where they dialogue as diptychs, and then there's a flow of a few pages. And there's another one of the older women in the full-length skirts beside the really young girl who's got on like a bathing suit that might have been considered somewhat skimpy and provocative at the time. And it's just kind of this counter of like old and young and conservative and a little more open. And it just deals with some themes. I think it's just amazing the way that the kind of flow of the book is. It's quite smart, but simple and very elegant. So I think that you guys in particular did a very good job in kind of getting the sequence together.
Yeah, so the sequence that I sent him originally is pretty close to what's in the book, but what I didn't do, and then he did, which did a really amazing job, was he determined which images would be standalone and which would be spread and which would go across the whole spread. And then there were a few that he did move around, especially for the kind of face-to-face pages. But when I was looking back, because I was kind of curious to see the evolution of the conversation, I think that's what probably makes him a very good designer and makes people want to work with him, is like, it wasn't drastically different from the vision that I had, and the choices that he made in terms of changing things just were all very intentional, and he could articulate those changes, I think, really well. So I think it was good to be able to work with someone who gave the space for that, and it's giving like really Lora the space too, because the book doesn't distract from her images and her words and you know, that sort of thing. So you know, the decision to put all of the text, including Nancy's essay, in the back, I think is just a way to really celebrate Lora as an image maker, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I truly enjoyed the process of working with you, and it was kind of nice. We collaborated really well together and kind of dealt with feedback through emails and phone calls, and I'm very happy to have any association with this book. And thank you so much for joining me today. It was really good to
Yeah,
talk today. Yeah.
thank you. It's
All
really
right.
good.
All right. Thanks, Nicole.
You're welcome.